The history of the world is a tapestry of visible threads, but the gaps between the lines are where the true wars are fought. For 18 years, the scriptures fall silent, leaving a void that has haunted the curiosity of mankind for millennia. But in the scorched deserts of the Levant and the ancient stone corridors of Nazareth, the elders whisper of a different story. They speak of a young carpenter who did not merely work with cedar and oak, but who carved a path through the very fabric of the abyss. Before he was the lamb led to slaughter, he was the lion who hunted the ancient stalkers of the soul. These are the forbidden chronicles, the accounts of a young Joshua facing the terrors that the Bible chose to remain silent about, so that the world might not tremble before its time. Part 1. The Curse of the Rotting Sentinel. The year was 12 AD, and the air over the Galilee was thick with more than just the heat of summer. It carried a weight that seemed to press against the very souls of those who lived beneath the Mediterranean sun. Joshua, now a youth of 15, stood in the center of his father's courtyard, his hands coated in the fine, pale dust of cedar wood. To any passing neighbor, he was merely the son of a craftsman, a quiet boy with eyes that seemed to look through the hills rather than at them. But within the core of his being, Joshua felt the shifting of the tides in the unseen realm. He felt the frayed edges of reality where the light of the Creator met the encroaching murk of a world fallen and forgotten. It began as a whisper in the wind, a stale, metallic scent that drifted from the direction of the old tombs beyond the village walls. This was not the clean decay of nature, but the stagnant, airless rot of something that had been denied its rightful end. One morning, as the first light touched the limestone dwellings of Nazareth, a package appeared at the threshold of the workshop. It was a bundle of linen, stained with damp earth and tied with a cord of coarse, matted goat hair. When Joseph, his earthly father, stooped to retrieve it, the birds in the nearby olive trees suddenly ceased their morning song, falling into a panicked, unnatural silence. As the linen was unwrapped, a child's toy fell to the floor, a bear stitched from rough gray cloth with eyes made of dull obsidian. The moment it touched the ground, the scent of a stagnant tomb filled the room, a smell so thick it felt as though the very air had turned to grave dirt. Joseph's brow furrowed in a deep, instinctive confusion, but Joshua remained motionless, his gaze locked onto the toy. He did not see a discarded object, he saw a tether, a spiritual anchor pulsing with a rhythmic, sickly violet light that connected this vessel to a shadow lingering in the outer darkness. The cycle began in earnest from that hour. No matter how many times the toy was discarded, no matter if it was thrown into the deep ravines or cast into the fire of the forge, it returned with the rising sun. Every morning, the bundle was there, pristine and yet radiating that same aura of putrefaction. Soon, the parchments began to appear within the linen, written in an archaic, jagged script that seemed to bleed into the fibers of the page. The words were a jagged cry of obsession. "Mother, why do you cast me into the outer darkness? I am the fruit of your womb. I am the shadow you cannot outrun." The village of Nazareth, usually a place of simple faith and hard labor, began to fracture under the weight of the phenomenon. Neighbors looked at the house of the carpenter with growing suspicion, their eyes filled with a primal fear of the unclean. They could not understand that this curse was not born of the house, but was an ancient predator, a rotting sentinel, that had found a crack in the spiritual fabric of a local family and was now seeking to expand its territory. Joshua watched the movements of the spirit with a terrifying, divine clarity. Every twilight, he observed a figure standing at the edge of the forest, the delivery man. He appeared to be a common traveler, yet his limbs moved with a disjointed, jerky motion, as if his muscles were being manipulated by invisible, agonizing wires. He was a mule, a man whose will had been hollowed out by centuries of bitterness, a mere shell used by the spirit to interact with the world of the living. On the seventh night, the tension reached its breaking diem. Joshua sat in the silence of the darkened workshop, the toy bear resting before him on the workbench. Beside him was Elias, a young friend who had been plagued by night terrors and a wasting sickness since the first package arrived. The air in the room was so cold that their breath came in pale clouds. Despite the summer heat outside, Joshua spoke, his voice like a pillar of fire in a frozen wasteland, telling Elias that the enemy did not desire his life, but his fear. For fear was the currency of the abyss. They walked out into the hills under a moon that looked like a silver scar in the sky. They reached the ruins of an ancient Canaanite altar, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin and jagged. Waiting there was the sentinel, the man with the mask-like face, holding the final package. His eyes were not eyes at all, but twin pits of glowing, violet mist. The sentinel hissed, a sound like dry bones grinding together, mocking the young carpenter for interfering in a harvest that had been planned for eons. The spirit claimed a blood debt, a life for a life, anchored in a sin committed by Elias's ancestors that had never been brought into the light. The shadows began to elongate, detaching themselves from the ruins and coiling around Elias like hungry vipers, their touch freezing his blood and draining the color from his skin. Joshua stepped forward, and for the first time, the sentinel felt a flicker of something it had not known in 1,000 years: absolute, crushing authority. Joshua did not strike with a sword or cry out in a panic. He reached into the very heart of the violet vortex, his hands glowing with a white-hot purity that turned the spectral threads into ash before they could touch his skin. By the word that was in the beginning, Joshua proclaimed, his voice vibrating with the frequency of the stars, I sever the tether, I command the rod to return to the earth, and the spirit to face the judgment it has delayed. A pillar of golden light descended from the heavens, a fire that did not burn the physical world but incinerated the illusions of the abyss. The sentinel shrieked as its connection to the earth was shattered, its form dissolving into a cloud of gray dust that the wind carried away into the void. As the sun began to peak over the eastern ridges, the heavy, metallic scent of the grave was replaced by the scent of fresh rain and mountain air. Elias lay on the ground, the color returning to his face, his lungs finally clear of the spiritual soot that had nearly suffocated him. He looked up at the youth standing over him, the boy he thought he knew, and saw a figure of such immense, quiet power that he could barely breathe. Joshua helped him up, his touch warm and steady. He explained that the darkness always tests the perimeters of the light, searching for the weak points of guilt and secrecy. This battle was not just for one soul, but a declaration to the shadows that their dominion over the hearts of men was coming to an end. Joshua looked back toward Nazareth, knowing that the 18 years of silence were not a period of waiting, but a secret war. He was the sentinel of the Father, and the master of the shadows had finally arrived to reclaim the dawn. Part 2. The Unmapped Void and the Eyes of the Ancient Betrayal. The victory over the rotting sentinel had left a lingering resonance in the hills of Nazareth. But for Joshua, the struggle against the encroaching darkness was far from over. As he transitioned into his 16th year, the physical labor of the workshop became a rhythmic meditation, a way to anchor his vast, burgeoning spirit to the humble soil of the earth. His hands grew larger, his frame more robust, yet the quiet intensity in his gaze only deepened, a silent testament to the wars he fought while the world slept. The peace of the Galilee was a fragile veil, and Joshua could feel it thinning once more as the season of the autumn rains approached. It was during this time that a new shadow manifested, not through a physical object like the toy bear, but through the medium of the forbidden lineage, a secret grief buried within the house of his own kinsman. A cousin of Joseph, a man named Reuben, had invited the family to a gathering in a nearby village to celebrate the birth of a daughter. The atmosphere was one of forced joy, a brittle happiness that seemed to shatter whenever the silence grew too long. In the corner of Reuben's dwelling sat a cedar chest containing several portraits, intricate sketches drawn by a traveling scribe from the distant coast. Joshua's mother, Mary, held one of the parchments toward the light, her face lit with a gentle, maternal warmth as she admired the likeness of the newborn child. To her, it was a memory of life, a simple charcoal rendering of a family standing before a sun-drenched window. But when Joshua reached out to take the parchment, the air in the room suddenly grew cold and stale, smelling of old, damp ink and the bitter salt of tears that had never been dried. As Joshua held the image, he did not look at the faces of the living. Instead, he focused his divine sight on the negative space, the shadows on the wall, the textures of the limestone background, and the unmapped void that existed between the charcoal strokes. His brother James leaned in, a sudden, inexplicable dread washing over him. Joshua, James whispered, his voice trembling like a reed in the wind. "The ink. It is moving." Joshua turned the parchment 90 degrees, as the desert mystics taught those who wished to see the hidden patterns of the world. There, manifesting from the uneven texture of the wall in the drawing, a face emerged. It was a face of absolute, bone-chilling terror. A woman with hollowed eyes and a mouth frozen in a silent, jagged scream. It was the face of Abigail, Reuben's sister, who had vanished into the wilderness 3 years prior and was presumed lost to the beasts of the desert. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. Abigail had not been taken by the desert, she had been taken by a sin committed within those very walls. Joshua saw the truth written in the spiritual residue of the ink. In every portrait, whether of the cousin's wife or the cousin himself, Abigail's spectral face was there, lurking in the background, but her eyes were not vacant, they were locked with a predatory, vengeful intensity upon the throats of the parents. In one image, she appeared to be whispering into the ear of the sleeping infant, in another, her severed, spectral head seemed to float directly behind Reuben as he ate, her expression one of such profound, unadulterated wrath that the ink itself began to bead like black blood. Joshua felt the accuser rising within the room, the entity of Abigail's unrequited justice, a spirit that had bypassed the gates of the grave to demand a reckoning. "She is not at peace," Joshua spoke, his voice dropping into a register that made the flames of the oil lamps flicker and die, plunging the room into a heavy, oppressive gloom. "You told the village she wandered into the sands. Reuben, you told the elders she was claimed by the heat. But the ink remembers what the earth tried to hide." Reuben collapsed to his knees, his face turning a ghastly, ash-gray color as the spectral presence of his sister began to manifest in the physical room. The walls of the house seemed to groan, the limestone sweating a dark, viscous fluid. From the shadows of the corner, a pair of long, pale arms, thin as parchment and cold as ice, slowly uncoiled. Reaching toward Reuben's neck, the eyes of the ancient betrayal opened within the darkness, glowing with a sickly, phosphorescent light that revealed the hidden crime, a dispute over inheritance that had ended in a silent, midnight murder beneath the floorboards. Joshua stood between the living and the dead, a pillar of unyielding light in a sea of ink-black despair. He did not call for the guards, nor did he condemn the man with the words of a judge. Instead, he addressed the spirit of Abigail directly. "Your blood cries out from the ground, daughter of Israel," Joshua proclaimed, his presence expanding until it filled the entire dwelling, pushing back the shadows with a radiant, golden heat. "But vengeance is a fire that will only consume your own soul until there is nothing left but ash. I am the mediator between the seen and the unseen. I am the one who brings the hidden things into the light so that the cycle of blood may finally be broken." He reached out and touched the parchment, and a surge of divine energy flowed through the charcoal lines, tin wa, purifying the intent behind the image. The spectral arms withered and retracted into the void. The face of Abigail in the parchment shifted one final time, the wrath in her eyes dissolving into a profound, mournful exhaustion before her features faded into the texture of the stone. The heavy scent of the tomb vanished, replaced by the sharp, clean smell of cedar and the rising dawn. Joshua looked at Reuben, whose soul was now laid bare and broken before him. "The earth will not hold her secret any longer," Joshua said, his gaze piercing through the man's deception. "Confess your sin to the elders before the sun sets, or the shadows you have created will return to claim what is left of your house. For where the truth is denied, the darkness finds its home." As Joshua and his family left the village, James looked back at the house, his heart still pounding with the echo of the encounter. He realized then that Joshua's path was not one of simple carpentry or quiet prayer. He was the hunter of the void, the one who could see the crimes written in the shadows and the ghosts hidden in the ink. The 18 years of silence were the training ground for the ultimate confrontation. Joshua was mapping the darkness of the human heart, one hidden sin at a time, preparing for the day he would stand before the gates of hell itself and demand the release of the captives. The journey continued, each step a declaration of war against the ancient stalkers who believed they could hide from the light. Part 3. The voice of the protector and the shadow of the father. The transition from the 16th to the 17th year of Joshua's life marked a period of profound spiritual intensification. The shadow years were no longer just a series of defensive skirmishes, they were becoming a deliberate, offensive campaign against the ancient principalities that had long held the Levant in a grip of terror. Joshua's physical form had matured into that of a man, his shoulders broadened by the weight of timber and his hands steady from 1,000 hours of precision. Yet it was his spirit that had undergone the most radical transformation. He walked the streets of Nazareth and the paths of the Galilee as a silent sovereign, his presence acting as a spiritual whetstone that sharpened the discernment of those around him. It was during this time that he was summoned to the aid of a young woman named Miriam, a kinswoman of his betrothed, who was experiencing a phenomenon that confounded the local healers and terrified the village elders. Miriam was a woman of ethereal beauty, but she had become a ghost of her former self. Her skin was the color of parched parchment, and her eyes were sunken, as if they were being pulled into the back of her skull by an invisible weight. When Joshua arrived at her dwelling, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and something far older, the smell of distant rain on desert salt. Miriam did not speak, she simply laid out a series of charcoal sketches she had made during her long, sleepless nights. In every sketch, a male figure appeared, manifesting not as a solid man but as a distorted, towering shadow that seemed to bleed out of the very background of the images. This stalker of the soul did not appear to be an enemy of the flesh, but a sentinel of the spirit, his features becoming more defined with every passing day, as if he were trying to punch a hole through the veil between the worlds to reach her. "He speaks to me, Joshua," Miriam whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. It is not a voice of anger, but a low, resonant vibration that echoes in the deepest chambers of my mind. He speaks in a language that sounds like the rushing of the great sea, repeating a single warning over and over. The crown is broken. The fire is within. As Joshua took the sketches, he felt the resonance of a protective, yet agonizingly desperate love. He did not see a demon, he saw a father. Miriam had never known her father, a man from the distant lands of the West who had perished in a sudden, violent storm before her birth. Now, as she approached her 18th year, his spirit had breached the laws of the grave, driven by a primal necessity to warn his daughter of a biological betrayal that her own body was committing against her. Joshua sat with Miriam as the sun dipped behind the western ridges, casting long, jagged shadows across the stone floor. He entered a state of profound meditation, his spirit descending into the abyssal void, where the echoes of the departed lingered. In that gray, silent space, he encountered the shadow, the spirit of the father. The figure was massive, his eyes filled with a terrifying, luminous grief. He pointed to his own temple and then to Miriam's, his voice sounding like the grinding of tectonic plates. The growth, the silent killer, it nests in the dark of her mind. Save her, son of the light. Joshua understood then that the stalker was not there to take her life, but to preserve it. The voice of the protector was a divine anomaly, a love so fierce it had managed to distort the physical reality of the sketches to capture Joshua's attention. The young carpenter stood and placed his hand upon Miriam's brow. He did not perform a traditional exorcism, for there was no evil to cast out. Instead, he acted as a conduit for the living water, allowing a surge of restorative, golden energy to flow into the delicate structures of her brain. He felt the abnormality, the hidden tumor that was beginning to press against her life force, the cause of her hallucinations and her wasting sickness. With a word of command that vibrated with the authority of the architect of the universe, Joshua halted the growth, sealing the biological rift that had threatened to consume her. The shadow in the room instantly softened, the oppressive atmosphere evaporating like mist under a midday sun. The sketches on the table suddenly shifted, the male figure receding into a faint, peaceful outline before vanishing entirely, leaving only the image of a smiling girl. Miriam gasped, a deep, soul-shaking breath that brought the color rushing back to her cheeks. The voice in her mind fell silent, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a warmth that felt like a father's embrace. Joshua looked at her with a quiet smile, knowing that he had served as the bridge between a father's desperate love and a daughter's survival. The grave could not keep his voice silent when your life was in peril. Joshua told her, but now he rests, for the sentinel of the Father has answered his cry. Go and live, Miriam, for your days are no longer counted by the shadows, but by the light. As he walked away from her home, Joshua felt the weight of his own destiny pressing more firmly against him. He was the one who could interpret the cries of the dead and the needs of the living. The master of the threshold who was preparing to heal a broken world. The 18 years of silence were never truly silent. They were a symphony of secret victories. A long, arduous journey through the darkest corridors of human experience where Joshua mapped the geography of the abyss. He had faced the rotting sentinel to prove his authority over death. He had unmasked the eyes of betrayal to demonstrate his commitment to justice. And he had channeled the voice of the protector to reveal the enduring power of love across the boundaries of time. He was no longer just the carpenter of Nazareth, he was the Lion of Judah in the making. A warrior who had mastered the seen and the unseen before his public ministry ever began. As Joshua approached the banks of the Jordan River to meet his cousin John, the atmosphere of the entire Levant shifted. The shadow years were coming to their triumphant conclusion. The hunter of the void was stepping into the daylight of history. Ready to become the light of the world. He walked with the confidence of one who had already looked into the eyes of the most ancient terrors and found them wanting. The world saw a man, but the shadows saw their end. The chronicles of the forbidden years remind us that even in the longest silences, the Creator is working, weaving a tapestry of redemption that covers every dark corner of our existence. The story of Joshua is the story of a light that cannot be extinguished, a truth that cannot be hidden, and a love that will hunt down every shadow until the morning finally breaks.